First and foremost, I just want to say thank you for you all for joining this workshop, this session. I'm excited to be able to partner with so many people who made this event happen today, or not even just today, from yesterday and today. I think this forum is beautiful. I think it's needed, and I appreciate you all for being here today. Because what did Jay-Z say? You can be anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, and I appreciate that. Um, so I'm going to jump in. Blair, what time do we have to end?
Here, one moment. It's here. Currently it's saying 3 p.m.
Okay. All right. I'll make sure that happens. I don't want to be the person who takes us way over. Can everybody hear me okay? Am I clear? I sound great. All right, cool. I see the thumbs up. All right, so let me go back to sharing, and then we're gonna jump into this experience. All right. You know what? I don't see I don't see the option to share my audio like I saw when we. Oh, never mind. I see it. Oh, it only lets you do it on the screen. Okay. Thank you for your patience, folks. Just making sure that things are right before we jump right in. One moment. All right. All right. I can no longer see you all because I'm presenting. Can someone just let me know if you can? Well, I think it's still loading. Do you all see like a loading sign or something?
Yeah, it says loading.
Okay.
Yeah, we do.
There we go. My computer's acting like I'm on dial-up or something. There we go. All right, there we go. So the name of this workshop is culturally relevant youth workforce development practices. I'm hoping that you all take away some thoughts, some ideas, some techniques, some background that help you in your journey as a work-based learning, work-based learning, as a workforce practitioner, as an adult, as a mentor, whatever you are working with young people. I'm hoping that you take away some nuggets from this. To introduce who I am, my name is Albert Phillips Jr., and I'm a founder and CEO of a Free Black Mind Educational Group, a company I started not too long ago, probably earlier this year. And I work to create empowering educational, digital, and print resources and programming for Black youth, not just throughout Baltimore, but throughout the country and even the world. But beyond that, I'm a writer, I'm an educator, born and raised in Baltimore City, and just proud to be here with you all to be able to share this experience with you today. So during this workshop, I'm hoping that you're able to cultivate a new mindset or practices. Even one of the resources that I referenced, she mentioned being able to, Zarita Hammond, being able to create a new paradigm or a new algorithm about how we talk about workforce development when it comes to young people, and how we help to prepare them for employment and to get into other things as well. So we're going to talk about culture, which is extremely important in a lot of ways, especially in education. And I find that there's a whole lot of stuff going on in education right now, but particularly when it comes to culture, we want to do a deeper dive into that and think about what we can do to address some of the issues within current models of workforce development. Before we get into other material, I just want to ground us with this powerful quote that I got from Kiese Layman. He wrote a memoir called Heavy, which is a really, really powerful book around his experience. He's a really, really dope writer, creative writing teacher, among other things. If you're interested in the memoir, I encourage you to check his out. But this quote just really stood out to me because I think that if we are unable to center ourselves and start with this in mind, nothing else really matters, to be honest with you. No practices, no techniques, nothing will really matter if we are not able to acknowledge that, or accept that Black children are all worthy of the most abundant, patient, and responsible. I love that word, responsible kind of love and liberation this world has ever created. So I just want to start by grounding us there, helping us internalize that quote as we use it as a guide for us to move forward today and even beyond just the workshop today. So cultural relevance, it's a term, it's one of probably 50 different terms that to me all mean very much the same thing. And it really centers on teaching that is empowering to students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically. And thinking about different cultural tools and reference to impart knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And this quote comes from Gloria Ladson Billings, who created the term and also popularized it, not just here, but I think around the country back in the mid '90s. So it's been out for quite some time. And one other important point to note is that all types of teaching is culturally relevant, but you have to ask yourself, who is the teaching relevant to? Whose culture is it relevant to, right? You have to think about that when you are putting together not just workforce development sessions and seminars, but also just teaching anything in general, particularly when it revolves around young people. Additionally, use the cultural knowledge, prior experience, frames of reference, performance styles, all these different things to make learning more relevant and effective. And without it, you really have a very, very dull lesson. You have an ineffective approach, and you are strongly lacking in what could be a transformative experience for our young people. So we really want to ground ourselves in being as culturally relevant as we can. But there are different layers to culture. I think a lot of us, when we think about culture, we think about food, dress, and music and holidays, which is really a surface sort of level of culture. It really goes a lot deeper than that if you're willing to dive in more. So what you'll see on the right of your screen is it's a very simple illustration, but I think it's also very impactful. And it comes from a book called Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And Eliza Maynard lays out different layers of culture and how it could be compared to different parts of a tree or plant. So as I mentioned, on the surface level, it's the food, it's the dress, it's the music, the different things like that. But as you go deeper, you start to have a deeper understanding of what culture is. So it starts to go into social interactions, like what are norms. I think somebody's off of mute. So just make sure that you have muted yourself if you joined us, and thank you for being here. So it goes into norms, right? Because we know that different people have different norms, different ways that we treat our elders, how we treat friendship. All of these things go a step deeper than just, what food someone eats or what music they listen to or what holidays they celebrate. Nonverbal communication, I think, is one of the biggest ones. Especially in the Black community. I mean, a look can let you know how somebody is feeling and what's about to happen next, or an experience that they may have been going through. So I think it's a power that we have, and also eye contact, appropriate touching, all these different things. But what I really challenge us to do is to really think about how we can get to the deepest level of culture, right? And that, if you look at the bottom towards the roots of this tree, you start to see things like spirituality, right? You see the notion of fairness, you see the worldview. So you won't get those things just by seeing someone in the cafeteria or walking down the street. Like you may not get these deeper level connections to culture, but this really comes through that relationship building and being willing to dive deeper. And some people may be like, well, man, I'm just trying to teach kids about how to do a resume. Why do I need to get into that culture? And it speaks to that point that we just looked at the slide before this. If we really want to make it culturally relevant, if we really want to speak to the young people who we want to have the deepest connection with, then we have to be willing to change and evolve in order to meet those needs. And again, as Zaretta Hammond put it, to challenge our algorithm and change our algorithm as needed in order to meet our young people where they are. Another important diagram that I want to show us is this individual and collectivism continuum, which is also something that's mentioned within Zaretta Hammond's book, but it comes from Cultures and Organizations Software of the Mind. You can feel free to look that up to do a deeper dive. But it was an index created by cultural psychologists that evaluates individualism and collectivism based upon a set of numbers. So the higher the number, the more that community is said to be more of an individualistic culture, and the lower the number, the more they're more connected to a collectivist culture. And as you see with the scores on our screen, we see the United States at a 91, right? It's almost at 100. And then we see the United Kingdom as at 89. And then you look at some of these other countries, 20, 27, 20, we start to easily see that there's a difference, right? According to this continuum, there's a difference in how people are seeing the world. If you're looking at a more individualist culture, it's more about self-oriented behavior and practices, right? And these things are favored in business, learning. I feel like the United States is probably the most competitive place in the world, right? Like everybody's trying to get to the top. Everybody's fighting and gunning to be number one, where other cultures, it's more of a group orientation when we look at places like Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana. There's some Latin American countries. This is not an exhaustive list of all the countries, obviously, but this is just a snapshot of what we see here. And I also just want to read that to even take it a step further. In the book where I got this from, it speaks of, in America, the dominant culture is individualistic, while the cultures of many African American, Latino, Pacific Islander, and Native American communities lean more toward collectivism. Most European cultures were rooted in an individualistic mindset, while the collectivist worldview was common amongst many of the places that I just named: Latin America, Asian, African, Middle Eastern, and many Slavic countries. Collectivist society emphasized relationships, interdependence within a community, and cooperative learning. Individualistic societies emphasize individual achievement and independence. And you might be asking, well, what does this have to do with workforce development? Well, all of this is all intertwined. If we're teaching young people, right? If we're teaching young people about workforce development and we're teaching it from an individualistic mindset, then we may fail to really. I think somebody's off mute. I'm sorry if they're saying something. I can't see you. But if we're teaching it from that mindset, then we're missing again their culture, and we're missing the need to be more collective as a society. And the idea around this is really layered also in pedagogy, or the way that we teach things. So there's a pedagogy of compliance that is very, very popular in education and workforce development all around our country, right? Where it's more of a lecture style, like, hey, I'm the teacher, I know everything, you're the student, you need to listen to me in order to get to where I'm at, right? Or to have a shot at success. So you have teachers who are carrying the cognitive load, right? They're not giving students an opportunity to share their knowledge, share their information, to commune in a way that the information is able to be related to who they are. But it's more so, hey, I'm talking, you're listening. But I challenge us to really shift our thinking and to shift our practice to one of more liberation, one of more anti-oppressive, one that treats our students as co-creators in the process, because their words and their knowledge and their experiences are valuable when it comes to teaching anything, not even just workforce development. And they should have a say in what they learn and how they learn, and that experiences should be valued in the process. And so we're going to be talking more about obviously the right side of this, but we know that the left side is very popular in a lot of models today. As I mentioned, I was a classroom teacher at one point a few years back, which I really, really enjoyed. Maybe someday I'll go back and be in a classroom full time. But I want to show you an example of how in the real world, I attempted to bring the culture of my students into the lesson. So I was teaching my students about police brutality, which we know is still very, very big, not just in our country, but when we hone in, our city has paid out tens of millions of dollars to citizens due to various complaints and mistreatment by the police department. And so my students were extremely interested in this topic. And we were doing some writing through one of our, I think this was one of our ELA classes. But in the writing, we actually thought about how can we not just complain about it, but how can we be forces of change? How can we be change agents in our own lives? And I want to shout out a few people before I hit play. I want to shout out Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle with Adam Jackson and Davon Love, because I've actually invited them into my classroom during this experience where my students were able to interview them and ask them questions about the work that they do. And additionally, West Wednesday with what's the sister's name? Tawanda Jones, I believe is her name. I want to shout out her as well, because my students, especially my young Black girls, were captivated about her activism and how she continues to protest every Wednesday after her brother was killed unjustly by the police department. So I want to hit play and we'll keep this thing moving.
This is Tara Graham reporting for the Real News Network in Southwest Baltimore. When we talk about police brutality, usually we're discussing adults, but we rarely talk about the impact it has on our children.
I believe activism starts as early as they're born, and I think it's important to instill in our youth that tradition now, instead of waiting until they become adults.
For the children of Baltimore, there are many challenges that their counterparts in wealthier communities don't face. Growing up in a city struggling with poverty and violence, and trying to learn in a school system that is chronically underfunded.
I think there is a lot wrong with police brutality because it causes people to die or get really hurt.
But there's another topic fifth graders at the Southwest Baltimore Charter School have to confront: police brutality.
In expedition class, we have been learning about police brutality and activists that are trying to end police brutality. An example of an activist is Ms. Tawanda Jones, who is the founder of West Wednesdays, which is a protest in Baltimore to raise awareness about police brutality.
Baltimore's police department is currently under a consent decree for using racist and unconstitutional tactics, which is why the students here studied the problem not just to learn about it, but to seek solutions.
My second solution is that we could talk with citizens to see what they need. My third solution is that we could contact our representatives and ask what they're doing to stop police brutality. If we could contact a representative like you and have a conversation with you and other leaders, we could discuss our problems and our needs.
They visited museums and spoke with activists.
We were also learning about how certain individuals, such as John Lewis and Ida B. Wells, how they resisted oppression and created change.
They pored over the Justice Department's report and studied cases from the past.
According to the U.S. Department of Justice investigation, about 150,000 police stops were in 2 small African-American districts. This is 44% of all stops in Baltimore. This makes me feel disgusted that people are being treated differently because of their skin color.
And they applied their findings to recommendations which they are sending to the police department.
My first solution to police brutality is to enforce a test that identifies racist police officers. There should be tests like this to see if that person is fit to be a cop. Also, this can help eliminate or reduce police brutality because then there will be less racist cops policing our city.
My third and final police reform idea is for police officers to stop criminalizing everything. If police officers criminalize the small things, they might miss the big, dangerous, or harmful stuff. Therefore, pedophiles and murderers can get away.
For their teacher, the process of learning the history of police brutality has been empowering.
It's been beautiful to see because they've grown so much. They can see from our step one of the writing process when they just had scattered ideas to them creating these letters. They can see the growth, and they became more and more interested. Mr. Albert, but what about this? Like they had a lot of questions, so it caused me to do even more research. Questions that I didn't know the answer to, I would say, hey, here's a laptop, you find it.
A sentiment echoed by the students.
Brutality in Baltimore must end. Police should be held accountable for their actions and get proper training if needed, and their income should be lowered if they brutalize.
Who hope their suggestions will make life better for everyone.
I wrote this letter for you to follow. You're probably going to say, I'm not listening to a fifth grader. Well, actually, anyone can make a difference, even kids.
This is Taya Graham and Stephen Janis reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland.
Every time I see that, I get reminded of how proud I am of those students for not just creating those letters, but we actually sent those letters, those recommendations to the closest police department that was near the school that I was teaching at. We didn't get a reply. We didn't get a response. But it did feel good to students be able to use their First Amendment rights to advocate for themselves, to voice their concerns, to do research, right, to meet folks around the city who are doing the work. And it was just a really powerful experience for my students. Let's get more into the workforce development side. So this idea of workforce development has been around for a long time. It's been around since at least the 19th century. In the overall outlook of it is pretty positive to foster individual, regional, and national economic stability. Any nation in our world wants to be able to do this. We want to be able to put people to work. We want to be able to put people in industries and sectors that are going to boost the economy of the nation, right? On the surface, sounds pretty good. This initiative later ensured that the nation economy and workforce remained competitive after the Great Depression. And the workforce development field, but one of the challenges to this, though, and one of the dangers and one of the hindrance to progress is that like a lot of other policies and ideas, right, it doesn't equitably support everyone. So we found through policy, workforce development field was systematically and intentionally excluding people of color. And we'll look specifically at just a few ways of how that happened. So the Wagner and Pacer Act, which was passed in 1933, established a public workforce development system, right? But it didn't benefit the Black workforce at large, especially those who were working in agricultural fields or domestic workers. And so it was not equitably distributed in a way that really benefited all of those who were part of this workforce. And then a couple of years later with the Social Security Act, we find that 67% of Black workers were ineligible for benefits that they were supposed to receive from a pension program that provided unemployment insurance for displaced workers and elderly people. So again, we see that we're being kicked out of that and we're not being supported there. We moved 3 years later to the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 that created the right to minimum wage and overtime pay. But again, it excluded those professions that were largely populated by Black workers and some other workers of color. So we see that, again, we have legislation that's not benefiting the workforce of Black folks in the United States of America. But we also see in the 1950s, and this is a huge point that I always talk to young people about as well, when we think about our collective strength, when we think about how do we really create change, and it's through us coming together and through us bringing our ideas and what we see in the 50s is through unionization in some parts to be able to create different change and benefit from improved working conditions. So you have real negotiating power when it's a group of employees as opposed to it's just one employee, which gets back to that model of individualistic versus being more communal. And so when we think about workforce development, there are areas that are always focused on. I mean, in every model that I've seen, these are some of the core areas that we really push and push and push on our young people to make sure that they follow, right? Make sure you have a resume. Make sure you know how to interview well, right? I put quotation marks around professional attire because a lot of time when we think about professional attire, is really attire that's appeasing to white people. And then we also have follow directions. So it's not a lot of room and area, right, for folks to do other things like advocate for themselves, like understanding their rights as a worker. We just talked about unionizing. How do you get into a workplace and really use it to level up professionally, maybe through certifications or other opportunities? Those conversations are often left off the table, unfortunately. We focus, in my opinion, very, very heavy on these kind of lower level or shallow conversations, but we don't focus enough on those conversations that can really shift the trajectory of their lives for our young people and help them to become advocates. We keep the real out of the conversation. I know a lot of people, including probably you all, who have struggled, and myself as well, who have struggled in different capacities on the job, in the workplace, right? Dealing with all types of stress, dealing with all types of discrimination, women not getting paid equitably as men, Black workers being discriminated against because of their hair. It's all types of stuff going on, but we're not having those types of conversations in a way for our young people to digest and to think about, not just so I can be upset about what's going on, but how can I be an activist? How can I push back and challenge oppressive practices in the workplace? And that's where I want to shift us to a little bit. So some of the things that are happening, and these things may be familiar to you all, you may have heard about them, but a few years back, Harvard Business School, they put out some stats around just applications, right? Because we always want to, obviously we have to apply for jobs to get positions. We do our resumes, our cover letters and things like that. But oftentimes we're not told that, or we're not having a conversation with our young people about how even from just that process alone of submitting an application, of putting in a resume and cover letter, the discriminatory practices can begin right then and there. So one pretty astounding stat is 11.5% was the percent of job applicants of Asian descent who received callbacks when their resume included references to ethnicity or race or a quote unquote foreign looking name. And so you have instances of people who will say, hey, my name is Bill, my name is Sally, my name is Mary, instead of what their given name is, the name that probably has some significant power and reverence, right? They're shying away from those names because employers are not interested in having people with those titles inside of their workplace, some employers. Additionally, even African Americans were not getting as many calls back when they signified their ethnicity. So Maurice and Taquan become Bill and Sam, right, on their resume and application at times, because they want to use it as a way to get in the door, right? And if we have to do that, just think about how demeaning that can feel. Think about how much that can tear you down when you can't even be who you are in order to get a position. And then we find that 25% was the number of African Americans who got a call back after they quote unquote whitened their name. So it actually went up from that 10 to that 25%. And again, I encourage you to check out this. You can Google Harvard Business School, this study, and be able to get more information. But to me, these numbers are astounding. And these are numbers and information that I think when we're talking about workforce development, we should include this in a conversation with our young people. But it doesn't stop there. How can we make it local and bring it home? So I'm not just trying to talk about numbers, but let's talk about a real example of someone who actually challenged discriminatory practices. And some of you all may have heard about this. This is Hooters. This is Baltimore City. This is right downtown, right? The place that I feel like gets the most investment in our city, downtown, where the tourists go. There was a woman who's a former Hooters waitress who was discriminated against, and I'll let you all watch the video, and then we'll talk more about it.
Hooters is known for its wings and its waitresses, but this week the chain is making headlines for hair, specifically highlights. They got one former Hooters girl fired in 2013 until she fired back in court. She'd been waitressing at Hooters, the Inner Harbor location, for about a year when Farrah Johnson decided it was time for a change.
I decided to put highlights in my hair, blonde in particular. And when I came into work, management was not happy about the highlights being added to my hair. And the manager at the time literally said, you can't have blonde because Black people don't have blonde hair.
She was baffled by the response. After all, Johnson says waitresses of other races did it and didn't get disciplined.
Ranging from bright iron to red to black and blonde streaks. So I was kind of confused on why my hair was an issue.
Such an issue, Johnson says, she started getting written warnings and taken off shifts before she was ultimately fired.
I was shocked. I couldn't believe it.
But she fought back. She sued, and this week she won. An arbitrator ruled Johnson's termination was illegal, racial discrimination, and she was awarded $250,000 for lost wages and legal fees.
Just to also have them look over the evidence and not really go off a personal opinion, but just the evidence that was presented to them and still rule and agree with me. That was great. I was very happy.
For their client, Johnson's lawyers called the decision vindication. For Hooters, motivation.
I hope that Hooters sees this as an opportunity to make improvements in the way they train their managers and the way they deal with their employees.
The arbitrator wrote that Hooters' handling of the situation violated federal and state civil rights laws. Hooters called the decision flawed.
Of course, Hooters will call the decision flawed. But this is, again, just an example of right here in the city. This was, I think, 2015, so about 6 years ago, where this happened. And at the time, I wasn't even aware of this. I became aware of it a little bit before I started writing my book that came out last year. And so I always try to use this as an example. This is one example. A lot of things, as we know, does not get reported, right? Folks may not have access to lawyers. They might not have funding to get support. They might not know what organizations, who should I reach out to in order to advocate for myself. And so things like this may happen on a regular basis in different places. And this was before, we'll get into, I think, in the next slide, this was even before the Crown Act was passed in the country, which I think was 2019. But in Maryland, it was passed last year. So this is before there was something on the books there when it came to that. But speaking of the Crown Act, you know, I'm a firm believer that our young people should be, and not even just our young people, everyone should be aware of this because this is so prevalent throughout our country when it comes to discrimination based upon different hairstyles, whether it was twists or locks or different things like that. And Dove is a big part of it. I have some feelings about Dove. That's another conversation. But I think the policy is what's most important to know and to understand, and for our young people to be able to use, right, if needed, as a form of protection and as a form of pushing back against unjust practices. And again, in Maryland, this was passed in October of 2020. You can check more information about that at thecrownact.com. So we spent a lot of time talking about culture. We talked about issues with workforce development. We talked about different policies that discriminate against Black people around the country. And so what I want to do is go back to the item that I mentioned when we began of not just shifting practices, but shifting our minds ultimately. And as Arita Hammond mentioned, it shifting our algorithm. If we are unable to do that, there's no amount of boxes we can check. There's no amount of I's we can dot and T's we can cross to say, hey, I'm culturally relevant. If we're refusing to change something deeper about how we see really young Black workers, right? Native Americans workers, Latino folk, Asian folk. How are we seeing things? Because all teaching is culturally relevant. But again, we have to remind ourselves, who is the teaching culturally relevant to? So these are some recommendations that I have about ways that workforce development organizations can shift their models in order to better support young Black workers. And with these recommendations, and this is not an exhaustive list, but this is just, in my opinion, a starting point. And so the first point you heard me mention a few times about helping young people become advocates is a huge part and a huge point to me. So helping them understand what are their rights, right? Not just about getting the job and making sure that they have their nice, crisp shirt and they have their tie on, but do they understand their rights when they get onto that job, right? As a young worker, do they understand human resources in the HR department, practicing different real world scenarios to go through? Well, if this happens, what would you do? If that happens, what would you do? Having a historical analysis on activism as it relates to employment. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was assassinated in 1968, he was in Memphis to help support low-wage workers, sanitation workers in that area, right? So this is not a new thing. This is not a new phenomenon. Our people have been fighting for years and years and years for equity and liberation and all of these fancy terms. But how do we bring it down to the ground and make it real world? How do we help our young people negotiate pay, right? We know there's so many people around this country who are not being paid justly. How do we help our young people understand that? And also steps to holding employers accountable. A second recommendation that I have is being direct about racism and white supremacy in this country from a historical perspective, especially when it comes to employment, and not just practices that happened 50, 60, 70 years ago, but what's happening right now. The Crown Act, like I said, just got passed last year in Maryland. It's a shame that in 2020 we had to say, hey, can y'all stop discriminating people because of their hair, right? Like but that's still a real thing to people, and a lot of times it's subconscious, and that's something that I think that folks need to work with. But determining how to challenge discrimination, right? Not just making our people informed about what it is, but how do you push back? How do you challenge? And providing opportunities for meaning dialogue around this topic. A third recommendation I have, a lot of people don't know that when it comes to workforce development, entrepreneurship is a part of that. It's not just about getting a job, but entrepreneurship and leadership training should be pivotal to programs that are supporting our young people. They need to see that, hey, I can become a CEO. I can run my own successful business. It doesn't just have to be a side hustle or something that I'm doing here and there, but it can be something legitimate that people can respect. And they need to be able to have access to leadership. So that could be in the form of, becoming a manager, joining a board, joining a committee. They need to see themselves as leaders in their lives, and that includes leaders in the work. They should not just see themselves as low-wage, entry-level employees that just have to take direction and take, words from other folk, but they should see that they can themselves become leaders and entrepreneurs if they choose to do so. And then lastly, improving the way that we provide career development support. Too often, organizations feel a level of comfort by checking a box and saying, hey, I helped this young teen get a job at this low wage place, right? Instead of thinking about how can I also shift them, at least provide them a roadmap to make it to career. We know many of our young people may start off one place, but more times than not, that's not what they want to do for the rest of their lives, right? It may be an entry point into something else, but it's our obligation to be able to provide and support them with having a roadmap to getting out of low wage positions and getting into positions that are high wage, in demand careers that are connected to their passions and what they want to do. And that also includes direct access into apprenticeship programs, colleges, and other post-secondary opportunities. It's not enough to say, you got a young person a job at Amazon, I fulfilled my obligation as a workforce development practitioner, right? If that's where you stay, that's where you land, then you're not doing enough of the work, and we're not doing enough of the work as workforce practitioners and supportive adults. We have to be able to push in that area. I'll end with this quote by Angela Davis, and it's probably one of the most powerful quotes I've ever heard in my life. But it's, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. And I think when it comes to various workforce development practices, we've accepted things for far too long. We've gone along with the get along for far too long. But now we have to hold folks accountable. After the, not just the death, but the murder of George Floyd, a lot of companies said, hey, let me double down and show Black people that I care. There was a lot of fancy slogans. Even before that, I think it was a bunch of folks with black boxes on social media. There was all types of T-shirts, all these different things, right? A lot of it was performative, but we have to think about how can we get beyond that? How can we start to change policy? How can we start to really have an influence on our young people to be not just worker, but worker advocates and understand what that means and the deep tradition that comes along with that. And again, being able to change things that we cannot accept. Lastly, I mentioned my book a few times, but I should have probably put this earlier. I did release a book last year called Y'all Hiring: A Black Teen's Guide to Navigating Employment, which is a pretty concise a book for young Black teens on how to, not just to get a job, but how do you maintain it? How do you exit it? How do you make the most out of it? How do you do challenge discrimination? A lot of the things that we talked about throughout this workshop. I encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. It's at www.y'allhiring.com. You can use code BCYF to save 10% on it just for the next 24 hours. Did that just for this event. But yeah, definitely check that out. And let's stay in touch. Here's my email. Here's my IG, The Ambitious Black Guy. It's my website, albertphillipsjr.com. I know we have, I think we have like 15, 20 minutes or so, I think, for the next thing that we got to push folks to so we can kind of dialogue and the answers. But beyond that, just like folks sharing their thoughts and ideas as well. And I thank you all for being here. I thank you for being a part of this workshop. And this has been a lot of fun being able to present this information to you today. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right, I can actually see folks again. Blair, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good. That was really good. If any of you guys have questions, make sure to type them in the session chat, not the Q&A part, just so we can all see and respond.
And thank you so much for folks. I see people were putting information here, and I'm sorry I couldn't see it. I was sharing my screen, and that was pretty annoying. But okay, I'm just reading about what folks have put. Oh yeah, Danielle, definitely reach out. I'd love to be able to connect with you. I'll also copy your email address as well. Debbie, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. But yeah, any thoughts, any questions? Here to dialogue.
Albert, I was curious about, I'm going to look back on my notes. You rattled them off really quickly and I couldn't write that fast. So when you were talking about, so very practical, the types of things that most of us do when we do workforce development, you had a counter list of other things. And so I'd love to hear more kind of what are those other things? And I heard some like, so advocation, and so I'm coming at it from, you mean the white world. And so I
I couldn't write fast enough.
No worries at all. Maybe we'll find some way to maybe even share out this slide deck if possible. But so yeah, the one first of all, thank you for the question. But one part of it, the first part was helping young workers understand their rights, and so that could come from a national level, like the Department of Labor, or even more of a local or regional level. And there are a ton of resources out there to be able to assist with that. But I think that's key. Another part of it, I'm sorry, I'm just going back real quick. Another part of it was understanding how human resources can help an employee. I think a lot of times when even we do it, right? We might get these jobs, and at the beginning they give us all this information, and we sign it, and we just leave the big packet like in the corner and never read it again. But helping our young people, like, hey, take a deeper look at that, right? There may be opportunity. There could be trainings. There could be opportunities to travel. There could be scholarship opportunities. There could be all of these different things that are encompassed within your job. Even places like Walmart and McDonald's. There are other things that employees that can tap into, but if you're not aware of it, then you may not do that, right? And then I also mentioned just being direct and open about racism. And I think it's an uncomfortable discussion. It continues to be one, but it's a very relevant discussion, especially when we think about different practices that are happening. But beyond just like the discussion, thinking about, okay, this exists. How do you challenge this thing, right? How do you change this thing? And looking at real world examples, which is why I showed the video of Farron Johnson. But beyond that, there are a ton of resources out there to be able to drive that point home. And the last two were entrepreneurship and leadership training. So transitioning beyond just like an entry level sort of employee, a low wage worker, to how do you get in positions of leadership and power within companies, within organizations, and also how do you become a CEO? How do you become an owner, right, of a business beyond just those things? And then the last one was just access to really a roadmap to get from where they are to where they're trying to go, which I find a lot of organizations do, but I think it has to be tied into the model explicitly. It can't just be like something that you might do or you might stumble upon, but how do you help students think about post-secondary opportunities and things beyond just like, Amazon and, the entry-level kind of jobs that are going on. So those are the things that I recommended.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question again. I see somebody put in the chat, have you seen the use of service volunteering increasing young people's resumes, interests, leadership as a means of workforce development? So yes. I think volunteering is extremely valuable. I mean, in Baltimore City Public Schools, students have to get, I think, up to 75 community service hours anyway. So in order to graduate high school, you have to do some volunteering. But even beyond that, we know that volunteering can expose you to a whole host of different opportunities and peoples and expand your network. So there's a lot of value in volunteering and being able to use those experiences, like you mentioned, Brian, to put on your resume and to be able to use that, in interviews and all types of things. That's a tremendous amount of value there. I'm just reading the chat. Graduated, goes. On Monday, I'm hosting a dinner for about 15 young men. I hope y'all have some good food. Who recently graduated from my mentoring organization. The goal is to provide continued vocational support and encouragement. What 3 things would you tell them? That's a great question. Oh, thank you so much for purchasing the book. One, the first thing I would tell them is that they are exactly what their ancestors prayed and sacrificed for. That's the first thing I would tell them. I want them to know and understand that they are valuable, that they are omnipotent, that they have a tremendous amount of love surrounding them. That's the first thing I would say if I had to speak to these young men. Secondly, I would encourage them to think beyond bounds, like think beyond limits, think beyond confines. I think sometimes we may limit our young people to what we've seen, what we've experienced, what we know. But I think one of our goals as adults is to help the next generation go farther than we've ever gone. And so a part of that is at least having a mindset of that I can do much more. I can think beyond. So think limitless is the second thing. And the third one is to, and this kind of ties into like how I was when I was a high school student. I think I was much more reserved. I was much more chill, and that caused me to miss certain opportunities because I didn't speak up enough. I didn't ask enough questions. I know for sure I left probably a few $1,000s worth of scholarship money on the table simply because I didn't write an essay. That was probably easy for me to write. And so I would encourage them to continue to be vocal about their needs, their wants, their desires, because I'm a firm believer that if you do that, you'll help to attract people that can help you get closer to those needs, those wants, and those desires. So continue to vocalize those things. Those are the three things that I would say to those young men. So thank you so much for that question. Oh, thanks for grabbing the audiobook. Speaking of the audiobook, I went in studio myself and did the audiobook, which was a learning process. And it took a long time, and we had to get the levels right because, I couldn't just like do it on my phone and upload it. They would not accept that because it wouldn't be good quality. But it was also a lot of fun. So thank you for checking out the audiobook. Oh, the studio I went to it's called Blackwater House. Blackwater House. And it's, I think, on Lexington Street downtown. A gentleman named Cariz Marcel, he runs it. He's really well known around the city with a lot of different musicians and in the arts community. So if you look up Cariz Marcel, if you Google his name, you should be able to find it. I'll even put it in the chat. But I went to his studio and we rocked out. We were in there for hours getting it done. Took I think at least 2 to 3 sessions to get it done. And my book is a shorter book. It's 80 pages. So I can only imagine if it was 300 pages, how long that would take. And yeah, just I would have needed a lot more water for sure. Connect with other youth development workforce leaders here in Baltimore. That's a great question. An event. I'm not sure of an event. I know I'm working to put together an event, but it's not going to be probably till next March or April. It's going to be a virtual event for teens. We're going to focus on workforce development, but it's going to be performance. I'll probably work with folks from the Baltimore City Youth Fund to help put it together. It's going to be a great experience. So that's one thing. I'm trying to think of a place. I'm not sure of a place either. I know that different organizations. I mean, I know that the Choice Program, and there are a number of other organizations around the city. But yeah, I'm not sure of a place or an event right now. Yep, Blackwater House. Yeah, Cariz is great. Yeah, and that's the point for sure. Thank you for that, Debbie. Yeah, we have to continue to create. If we don't see something, that's our opportunity to create it. I think, that's even a lesson I think my grandmother taught me. Like, okay, well, what's your solution? Thank you for the problem, but what you gonna do about it? You said so for spring break. Yes. Please send me information about the Youth Expo. I'm gonna put my know Blair put it in the chat as well. Blair, I appreciate you. I'm also going to throw it in here again.
Thank you. This was really great.
Yes. What time do folks transition out?
Here. It says 3 p.m. So we have about 7 or so minutes.
Got it. Brian, yes. Oh, Brian, please send me a request on LinkedIn and we can definitely connect there. But yeah, I'll definitely let you know. I appreciate you for asking about that. This has been awesome. I can talk to y'all all day. Definitely the highlight of my day right here.
So I was thinking about, one of the things we've been doing, and I think we talked a little bit earlier about social capital, and I feel like that's one of the pieces that's key to kind of this workforce development work. So one of the ways we've seen that work in our DC market is using that social capital board members to open up like high level internship positions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we forget to do that sometimes, like, and figuring out like, and it's not just applying to the internship, but it's actually having that relationship with that agency and being able to communicate. There's I hate the word support system, but there's a support system behind our young people who are going to help them fill in the gaps and be successful in that internship, kind of to get them in the door.
Yeah.
And I do think we have a lot of power collectively to open up those opportunities for students who would potentially be not considered in the past.
Yeah, I think internships are extremely powerful. I always tell young people that I wish that I would have done more when I was in high school. I didn't do my first internship until college, but extremely valuable. Being able to meet different folks, to really just move around the company and see how folks interact with each other, to learn new skills. There are even some internships that lead to credentialing. And so I'm a huge proponent for internships, especially paid ones, for our young people to participate in. So I appreciate you for bringing that up. Yes. Okay. We have 5 more minutes before we're all going to jump back into that main room, that main stage. What's coming up next after this, Blair, for folks who may not be aware?
Here, I believe we're going to have a short break. And then after that, it's a fireside and closing keynote.
Got it. Is there going to be some more DJing during the break?
Absolutely.
Nice. The DJ has been on fire today.
Yeah.
I had it on for a minute. I just was doing something else. And I just was, especially the club music. I haven't heard club music in so long. You go out and it's like everything that's on the radio. It's not Baltimore. It's not a lot of Baltimore club music in Baltimore. I find. Thank you for grabbing the audiobook. I appreciate it. Yeah, it should be on. I think most people get their audiobooks from Audible, and so I made sure to put it there. But it should be other places as well. It's Tony. There we go. Now you're talking. I think you can put in a request for the DJ. So Brian, that's what you want to hear when we go to the main room. You can put that request in. Hear some Miss Tony club music. The only thing, Blair, that I wish that I could have done, I wish that the other workshop that's going on right now was at a different time so I could watch it. Even though I know this is being recorded, I can go back and watch it.
Yeah.
But I wish I could have seen it live.
Yeah, there were like a bunch of really great ones. I am looking forward to like going back and watching them.
Yeah.
It's different when you're like presenting and on the back end.
I know. Yeah. I've definitely hosted events where I'm like, I didn't experience a whole lot because I was helping out with a ton of stuff, but I'm glad y'all enjoyed it. I definitely know that feeling. And Debbie, did you hear about the event from LinkedIn?
No, I'm on BCYF's funding. So our organization is we're paid. One of our contractors, no, I'm a contractor for Lakeland Community STEAM Center. So they received a very large BCYF fund. So I've been on the mailing list for a while and know Sadiq. And so kind of, it was a great topic. It was nice to be able to do it virtually, though I do miss being in person.
I do as well. Yeah, maybe if we do it again next year or whenever it's done again, we can do it.
Yeah. No, it's super great to see some familiar faces and just kind of connect to I feel like we've become even more siloed in the last 18 months.
Yeah, in a lot of ways we have. And I also work for Baltimore City Public Schools, so I see that even that, like with our teachers and with our students, like it's still some disconnects, and there was some learning that didn't happen, obviously. So some of our teachers describe some of the students as like, if they're in ninth grade, they're like big middle schoolers.
Oh yeah, they haven't been in school. I mean, in theory, they haven't had a full year since they were a sixth grader.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I've lots of friends who are teachers, and that's where our work is. So we're all of our work is in the OST environment in STEM.
Got it.
So so we're seeing students like content that would normally like be like this. We're like, okay, this could take a little more of a lift than we're used to, and teachers are tired, and it's just it's a hard space at the moment. It is a hard space.
I agree.
So,
every teacher I know is exhausted. They're
like,
come on, winter break.
Yeah. What do you do for BCPSS?
I work in the Office of College and Career Readiness. So I work as a work-based learning specialist.
Oh, nice. We have a meeting with somebody in your team in a few weeks, I think.
Oh, awesome.
So the whole connecting piece was interesting to me because I have an Americo Vista who I just hired, but one of his tasks we're continuing is to kind of really do a little bit of asset mapping of what's really going in and on in the college and career workforce in Baltimore. And so he's just slowly meeting different people and just trying to understand what does the landscape look like.
What's his name?
His name is Sam Mamamez.
Oh, no. Okay. I'm thinking about somebody else. Because I think I talked to, it may have been a different organization. I talked to an American.
I hate to tell it, but your name's going on his list. So
yeah, feel free, tell him reach out. Feel free.
Yeah, no, because part of it is just understanding the network and figuring out what it looks like. And because that's where our CEO wants us to go. So we've been in the K-8 world, and now in DC, we've had more impact in the internship position, but it's organization that's where he wants us to go. And I'm like, okay, well, Baltimore's really different. So I need to understand the landscape before we jump in.
Yeah. And it's essential. I mean, anytime you're moving into a new area.
Yeah. So one of our fun things we've been doing, we've always hired back students to come back and work for sites. So we have high schoolers now currently teaching after school STEM alongside teachers. So that's kind of my fun. But we do training alongside it and kind of supports behind it. So kind of gained a few new things about what does that look like and how do we make it more meaningful for students. But yeah, paid employment is kind of my thing in the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it was a great talking to you. And
you too. Thank you. And I pulled your hello email. So yeah, look for an email from a gentleman named Sam.
I'll be on the lookout.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we got to run to the other room. Right?
Yep, I see it. They're kicking us out.
Yeah, I know they're kicking us. All right. Thank you all so much.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
See ya.